Good morning. Can everybody hear me?
Oh, we got you, Lori.
All right. Sorry for the delay. Cam, do we have a quorum?
I'll take roll call real quick, Madam Chair. I believe we do from just glancing at the screen here. It looks like we may be waiting for a couple of more folks. But I'll keep an eye out for them.
Do you want to give it one more minute, or do you want to go ahead and call up to order?
Um, I think we can get started, and as I'm taking roll call slowly, folks may.
Okay.
So,
All right. All right.
Lori,
Well, call the meeting to order. It is 9:01 a.m. This is the Arizona State Board of Pharmacy task force committee on rule writing. And Dr. Gunn, if you want to take roll call.
absolutely. Ms. Walmsley,
Present.
Ms. Davis has been substituted with Mr. Thorwald. So, Mr. Thorwald.
Here.
All right. Ms. Nair.
Here.
Mr. Dang.
I'm here.
Mr. Pond. Mr. Pond had back-to-back meetings, so I know he's joining, but he's probably running a little bit behind. Ms. Howe?
Here.
Ms. Fine?
Here.
Mr. Boson? Mr.
He
Boson.
just joined.
Okay. So he's hopping on. I'll circle back. Mr. Morris?
Here.
Okay, Sandy is off today. Ms. Almer? And Ms. Patel?
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Boson, circling back.
Looks like his audio is still connecting.
Yep. I see him on the screen, Madam Chair, so I'm going to mark him present. So we do have a quorum, Madam Chair.
All right, terrific. I do know we have a couple of special guests. As we normally will bring in special guests when we have a variety of topics, we do have two special guests that Dr. Gandhi invited. Dr. Gandhi, do you want to introduce those folks and add anything additional on that?
Certainly, and extend my thanks for them participating. Mr. Palumbo with Express Scripts and Mr. Nathan Hunnell with Humana. We reached out to them, and of course, we have Emily that served with Amazon PillPack in her prior life. So we have three folks that have that work in this space on one of our agenda items, agenda item 4E. And for the board to better understand what's happening in the real world is why they were invited before we kind of pull the trigger and try to make laws that may not make sense if things are already going on, or trying to fill in the gaps or whatever. So this is learning opportunity for us, is why they've been called and graciously volunteered to be present here today to talk about their business models and what they do and with temperature sensitive drugs or just drugs in general that are mailed through with various temperatures across the country, obviously. So thank you again, guys. And, we'll take it up from there, Ms. Wamsley.
Yes, appreciate you guys accepting the invitation to participate. It is definitely valuable as a board member, and I think it'll be valuable for this committee as we start into the discussion to understand what's happening in practice today, so that way we can make a good decision. So, Dr. Gandhi, where would you like to start on the agenda? I want to be sensitive to our guests, but I'll take your cue on where you want to start.
I think that may take some time talking about temperature. So maybe we circle back to the topics we had last time, which I think we had robust dialogue already. I don't know how much we need to further discuss that, but I want to first of all thank Emily for assisting in drafting the transfer language. And if we could maybe touch that real quick. From several pages, we whittled it down to not Idaho standards, but maybe Oregon, Idaho standard and combination. So if you guys can maybe chime in on that, if there's any questions, comments, or maybe further revisions, we can entertain that. And I can put it up on the screen if you'd like, Madam Chair, to.
Yeah, that would be great.
A second, it's loading. As Madam Chair, it's taking longer than expected to load. All right, there we go.
Thank you, Cam. Committee members, any feedback on the proposed language? I know that you all received it in email form before the meeting. And thank you, Emily, for your help with drafting.
This is Mr. Thorwald. I have a couple quick questions.
Yeah,
Since-
go ahead. I know
I'm-
you're new to this discussion too, so.
Yeah, being absolutely new to it, my question is probably very basic. What are the purposes? If you all, when you get to each one of these, if you could tell me what the purpose, what the problem is you're trying to solve with each one of these, it would help me to better understand what I'm reading and have read.
So Madam
So-
Chair, if I may jump in real
Yeah,
quick.
please go ahead, Kim.
So Frank, for the federal code change regarding initial transfer of Schedule 2 through 5, it's now allowable through the federal code based on it being a closed network system using the EPCS system. So while we were trying to figure out how to incorporate that into our transfer language of a prescription from pharmacy A to pharmacy B, we figured we'd just tackle the whole thing about non-controls and controls. It was very scriptive, very lengthy. It took up, I think, 2 or 3 pages worth of language, which could be summarized in this small section right here, capturing federal law and capturing our requirements already for what's required on a prescription. So when you transfer it, all those components are transferred over, and it's traceable versus us saying, transfer the patient's name, transfer the drug, transfer who took it, transfer who transferred it, and all this other stuff. So rather than getting involved with the minutia of the transfer, I think it's pretty well summarized here.
The other thing, the other, I guess, main change and what generated a lot of discussion at the last meeting, Frank, is most transfers today, especially for non-controlled substances, are done kind of by electronic means, either using some sort of forwarding system or faxing and those kinds of things. But you needed to have the pharmacist or the intern's name that was on the other side of it, which still created a lot of extra work and phone calls for something that really wasn't necessary. So we were looking at this as a way to kind of clean up the language and save time for pharmacists, but still protecting patient safety, to kind of modernize it to how practice actually is happening today. So we don't really necessarily care who sent the fax or who's on the other side of the fax if the information is plainly available. I personally think this accomplishes our goal. But Frank, did you have other questions?
Well, my only question would be from an illicit transfer type of thing. Let's say there's some type of criminal act going on that's not supposed to, and people are transferring things from one place to another to cover their tracks. Is there any concern about that?
I think that might be addressed in like the audit log of the prescription, like within the modern prescription processing systems. If somebody's like accessing something and then deletes it or tries to transfer it, that would be recorded within the software, I think.
Yeah, and I think these 2 words right here, audible trail, which should capture what's happening at the receiving end and also at the folks transferring end. Because that's what happens today, Frank. And your concern can be applicable to today's language as well. This kind of just summarizes it in a third of a page versus 2 pages long.
Okay, that makes sense.
And
long
this
as
is
there's-
not transferring a physical product, when you think about it, like this isn't taking drugs from one pharmacy to another pharmacy. This is transferring an electronic record. So you, your insurance plan changes and now you can no longer use pharmacy A. This is transferring it to pharmacy B, the electronic record, so that you don't have to get a new prescription. So just trying to make it more modern and easier for pharmacies to be able to comply kind of within the new practice standards, is how I would explain it.
That makes good sense. That's very reasonable. It looks good to me then.
I think it looks really good as well.
Okay,
Nice job.
so maybe if I can have a motion by the committee to,
Could I ask a question or two first? I like it very much. I just have two clarifying questions. Am I reading that with this in perhaps subsection 2 or somewhere else, single fill transfers are allowed? I just want to be really clear because it's a question that comes up fairly frequently. Upon a patient or caregiver request, a prescription may be transferred within the limits of state and federal law. I think within the limits, that means a single fill would be allowed, but I just want to make sure we all intend that.
thoughts from the
Roger,
committee?
single fill is meaning the originating pharmacy keeps the prescription. Is that what you were saying?
Yes.
Correct.
So if someone's on vacation, they just want one fill and then they want the originating pharmacy to keep the script.
Correct.
Or we're transferring it to New York and New York requires us
Yes.
to keep the script.
So this would mean like if there were 3 refills on a prescription or 3 fills remaining on a prescription, the original pharmacy could transfer 1 fill out. So the new pharmacy would have 1 fill and the original pharmacy would have 2 fills. So that the total number of pills left on the prescription would be the same.
And it'd be patient's choice. I mean, up to the patient what they want, but
I would be in favor of that just because there's so many times where there's probably like 4 unnecessary phone calls to get a patient their medication one time when they're on vacation. And sometimes it's just like 5 pills or something. This would allow for that to be a one-time transaction as opposed to a bunch of transferring back and forth where there's room for error with each of those.
So does federal law allow one time, Roger? If it's
federal law is quiet on it. It's state law that is limited around the country.
So would that just involve non-controls?
Right, it would just be non-controlled. But this whole section only applies to non-controlled, correct? Yeah,
Well,
so
yes,
part 1
and- Yeah, I mean, it does reference the federal code. So it's kind of intertwined for non-control and control. So it's basically when applicable. Number 2 is applicable only to non-controls because it does say state and federal law. So federal law may be mute, but we may allow it at state for non-controls again, right?
And I just want to
Hey,
make sure,
everybody, I
because
just
it doesn't say it explicitly, but yeah.
Sorry, Roger.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I had a quick question. Under 3A, it references 1104B6. And is that implied that it also includes B7 there as well, where it talks about transferring the pharmacist shall not delegate the transfer of controlled substance?
I think federal law already states that pharmacy technician, it's only interns and pharmacists that state it. So it goes back to number 1, where you're allowed to do controlled substances as long as you're following the federal code.
And it says it can be delegated pursuant to that one section.
Yeah, but you can't, controlled substances are not, you can't delegate that.
Thank you.
I
Are
have
we
one
all
other-
in agreement,
I have one-
agreement on that piece? I have one other question too. Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right, so number 2 to Roger, summarize yours. So apparently the committee looks like they're in favor of a single fill transfer.
Okay.
I have one
And I'm
other-
happy to wait. Someone else may have another question. I just have a second one before we finish this.
Go ahead, Roger. And then we can.
So
move
on
to the next
number
person.
4, sure, number 4, pharmacies sharing a secure real-time database are not required to transfer prescription information for dispensing. But that means 2 different pharmacies are filling from the same script. That works really easily in a Walgreens or a CVS system, but there are pharmacies that share things that aren't the same pharmacy. And I'm just trying to understand how that works.
I think systems that share the prescription do not change the prescription number. Is that correct? Am I correct on that?
That's not
No.
true for my company.
Yeah, but if that prescription number changes, that wouldn't apply to this number 4.
Are you thinking like this was like kind of aimed at like central fill, right? So we're not really transferring the prescription, but you're sharing the information for the purposes of dispensing.
Yeah, but I think if the prescription number changes when you transfer it, that's not applicable to number 4. Then that's a true transfer.
I would say so too. I think we had talked about how there's some like multi-state arrangements, right? Where, you know, maybe the concept of central fill may not be allowed. So the company actually has to perform a transfer versus in a state like Arizona where central fill is permitted. That would not constitute a transfer since it's like a real-time database sharing. And this was copied from Washington, I believe.
Okay, so I mean, so if you end up with 2 different prescription numbers, it is going to be a transfer.
Yes, that's how I would take it. Yes. So, Emily, just to make this our own Arizona, maybe I can take out the dash there between real time. That way,
Sure.
that's why it's unique to our state.
Sounds good.
Not just like.
What do you have against hyphens?
I just want to make it unique to Arizona. All right. I think there was another question. Also.
Yes, I had one other question. When we're talking about records, for instance, somebody transfers the prescriptions from one pharmacy to another pharmacy, they've moved for whatever. Would that include, for instance, their shot records or their history, all their history?
No, it's
No,
just that one prescription is transferred, Mr. Thorwald.
Well, what I'm getting at is, let's say I move from one side of Arizona to the other side of Arizona. I moved to Show Low, for instance.
Yep.
And I'm not using Walgreens anymore. I'm using Safeway or a local pharmacy somewhere. And I now have no record of what shots I've had or other things that I may need as the future. 6 months later, I need to get a shot for XYZ, and I have no clue what I got and I had before. So
so the whole profile doesn't transfer, Mr. Thorwald. Only prescriptions that are live, still active. But your shot records are kept centrally in the state. So if that pharmacist is exercising their due diligence, they'll verify your shot record that's kept centrally by the state to see if you've had shingles vaccine or pneumonia vaccine and so forth. So that's readily accessible today.
great, thank you.
Cam, this is Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin.
I just want to clarify that there is no restrictions or limitations to the number of transfer within our state, right?
Or non-controlled.
For non-controls, yeah, you can transfer that thing as long as there's active refills on that prescription.
Okay, then should we consider removing the verbiage that says within the limits of state and federal law? Because when I read that, if there's no limits, then why should I even mention within the limits?
Well, the limits, I think, apply to the number of fills, number of tablets on that prescription. So there are limits, but it's limited to, again, for non-controls, limited to a number of quantity prescribed or number of refills allowed.
Okay. I still
also-
think that, It's a
I also
little
thought,
bit vague.
Mr. Dang, that it kind of, because this is talking about both controlled and non-controlled, that the language was applicable to both into number 2.
Yeah, but then if you look at number 1, subsection 2 through 4 clearly applies to non-controlled drugs. So if I were to read this whole page, I know that everything on this page, 1, 2 to 4, are geared towards non-controlled drugs. Then I move on to number 2, is that within the limits of state and federal law. I just feel it's a little bit, it can be confusing to some pharmacists or technician.
Let me throw something out as well. If next week the federal government decides to change the laws on some of this, so that this some of this is in violation of the federal laws, you would need to have that in there.
I think the intent of kind of chopping this down and just referencing some of the federal law sections was to allow for our, like, the flexibility if the federal law were to change, but also not having like a bunch of unique factors that could then also clash with federal law.
Pharmacies would be required to comply with federal law regardless if we changed it anyways, Frank, so that the code section here probably wouldn't change anyways. So again, we were trying to make it in a way that would kind of stand the test of time without having to go and change it, because pharmacies are going to have to comply anyways.
Does this add any undue burden or cost to pharmacies or to individuals?
It should actually help.
So if the highlighted blue section here, if I just move that below number 4 and make controlled substances separate from number 1 altogether, would that? Because I feel that 21 CFR kind of detail outlines everything that we don't have to reiterate, right?
It's always better, in my view, if you can have it clarified, that the difference between non-controlled and controlled.
So if we moved it here for the federal part.
It'll also look better for you with anything that goes before Kirk.
Would that be more cleaner?
I like it better.
So I think we've captured the essence of what we're trying to intend here. I mean, I could take it back and maybe work with Emily and see if we can still maintain this narrow language with capturing everybody's concerns and thought processes here. Maybe this solves it, maybe it doesn't, but we can put our heads together and try to fix some of the confusion that you've expressed, but keeping the intent of what we want to accomplish here. Is that fair?
Sounds good.
So with that, Ms. Walmsley, I'd ask the committee to A or nay to move it to the full board review at the February meeting.
Thoughts from the committee?
You know, I maybe to help Dr. Dang, we could just say a prescription may be transferred in accordance to state and federal law and take out within the limits. Something that simple might clarify his concerns.
Thank you, Ms. Nair. I like that. Or Dr. Gowdy, maybe we can mention something like upon a patient or caregiver request, a prescription may be transferred, but not to exceed the total number of refills stated by the physician. So if the doctor gives me 6 refills, I know that I can transfer back and forth up to 5 times.
Actually, you could transfer more than 5 times if the person didn't fill the full prescription.
Yeah, I think we're getting more into the weeds again where we wanted to
Yeah.
take like a
Or
wider.
maybe we say not to exceed the total quantities prescribed by the physician.
I think I generally agree with that. Sorry, Kristen, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Emily. You're fine.
But my concern is like maybe this is too in the weeds, right? But think about how many times like a prescriber might write kind of like a nonsensical quantity that might not adhere to the package size of like a unit of use prescription. You're probably making like some modifications, and maybe your total quantity within your prescription management system is going to not exactly match the prescription because they don't know that a tube comes in 28.5 grams instead of 30 grams or something like that.
Well, and I think that's also addressed in our adaptation language that we have somewhere.
Oh, true. Okay.
So they could modify that prescription for the quantity.
I would jump in and say that sometimes in things like this, you have to be in the weeds so people can clearly and concisely understand what you're saying. If you're reading this, if it's too high a level and it gives the people the opportunity to make judgment calls, and you may not want that to occur.
Yeah, the opposite is also true. If we try to include all the different examples, we'll miss some. So I think that taking sort of a standard of care approach is what we're aiming for.
So I guess the happy medium here is let's go with Ms. Snare's suggestion earlier. Can you repeat that again?
I like what Cam just changed it to. That seems to work.
All right, perfect. Thank you, sir.
I like it too.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
Okay. So, Madam Chair, if we can get consensus on the language and move it
You
forward.
want a motion? Is that what you said?
Yeah, do we have a motion on the proposed language to send it forward to the full board?
I'll make a motion to approve this and present it to the full board.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, great work. I think this is good. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Can we maybe possibly discuss one more? Hopefully it doesn't take as much dialogue as this one.
Go ahead, Cam.
I didn't think we were going to go there, but
I'll take your lead. I think it's good discussion, though. I mean,
no, absolutely.
And ultimately, we want to get as close as we can to the final product and make sure we get some alignment here. And that's the reason why we have these stakeholder meetings, is to get everybody's perspective to do what's best for Arizona.
So Roger, I had reached out because you had mentioned during the last meeting of a definition of Drug Supply Chain Securities Act. I'm not sure if you were able to identify anything. I couldn't find it, but I found a whole section of a slew of definitions that talked about Drug Supply Chain Securities Act, and all those definitions kind of, in a nutshell, define that. But let me put what I have on the screen from last time. Well, was there a 1 or 2 liner definition of that? Or should we keep this? Because I couldn't find that.
This is Mark. Isn't the Drug Supply Chain Security Act part of the DQSA?
Yes.
And do we have to refer to it as the act? Can we just say what it is we want to accomplish, which is the interoperable, sorry,
Well, and this is kind of what this says, E
I see,
and
okay.
E1 right down here. So that references it. But we don't have a definition of Drug Supply Chain Securities Act. And do we even need one? I don't know. That's my question for the experts in a room.
Isn't the concept that I mean, all the places that are governed by this, it's a federal law, have to comply with it. Are we going to enforce it also?
I think somewhere in our statutes or rules says you can only do business with other permitted or authorized entities. That kind of on an umbrella covers drug supply. So we enforce it today. If you're not doing business with authorized individuals or permitted individuals. So I would say yes, we would.
But
So
Arizona
Campy,
permits the entities, not the feds.
I'm sorry.
Cam, can you go down, where is the Drug Supply Chain Security Act used? Just in E1 here?
I'm gonna have to query our entire rules section, but I think it was mentioned somewhere else.
Mr. Boson, can you repeat what you said? I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. When Cam was talking about Arizona requires entities to do business with permitted distributors, manufacturers, whatever, the list of people. Arizona permits those entities. The feds do not. The feds
Right.
register those entities.
Yes, correct.
And so to Roger's point, and to Cam's question, do we have to register the DSCSA? Unless it's described somewhere else, I don't think you do, because as a component of being a permitted entity that is covered by things that the federal act requires, then the Arizona permit that requires us to follow state and federal law, that we say a lot in our act, which is fine. If federal law requires electronic interoperable tracing of serialized items, and the pharmacy is supposed to only acquire those after November 2024, or if there's another extension, then we're covered by you have an Arizona permit, and that permittee is required to follow state and federal law.
So Mr. Boson, if I'm hearing you correctly, you don't believe we need a definition.
Well, I'm not sure that we do, unless there's some requirement somewhere that uses the words, and then I agree, it would be important to describe the exact citation, which we do below, though. So if in E we've got 21 USC 360 triple E referenced, it's there. It also saves us the problem of if Congress passes something else that supersedes it, and don't have to go back to our rule and add that or subtract this.
From my perspective, I think it should be in there. As a GERC person, I would want to see that in there.
The definition, that is, Frank.
Yes. Even if it changes in the future. That's generally the feeling I have. I mean, I'm starting my 8th year on GERC, and this is the kind of thing somebody GERC would want to see.
Then I think the definition needs work because the DSCSA says so much more than that.
Yes, and that's why I see the link at in the bottom portion. It allows you to go to that and do more research if you need to.
I'm just thinking out loud. We don't define the Controlled Substance Act or the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act in our definitions. This is, to me, just a similar law like those. And all the pharmacies and people involved have to comply with the Controlled Substance Act and the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act.
Yes.
That's
And
a fair point, Roger.
It is a fair point. And if they come before GERC, I would think GERC would ask that very question, that they would be put in there as a reference.
And if it was really important to keep it, I think a more accurate definition is the Drug Supply Chain Security Act is Title II of the Drug Quality and Security Act.
Yes, I think that's even better.
Drug Supply Quality Act, is that what you said?
Yeah, literally, the thing we call Drug Supply Chain Security Act is Title II of the DQSA. Title I was all of the compounding things.
Then do we have to define DQSA?
Well, I see that's the rabbit hole you go down, and I don't know. And the DQSA is a component of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. I mean, we could just keep going.
You always can, and no matter what you do. But it's like an atomic bomb. Is it big? Is the small one big enough, or do you want a really big one? I think you've got to use at least some common sense within that, and I think you at least need the basics. And somebody can do research from there. When they get into the research on that, they're going to see that it's a part of something else and move on from there.
Just trying to figure out if there are a myriad of federal laws that all these pharmacies, pharmacists have to comply with, and I don't want to get into defining every one of them in our definitions.
I think that's true. To Roger's point, when we evaluate compliance issues and when courts and ALJs evaluate things, they'll pay attention to what you added and what you chose not to add, and presume that what you chose not to add is less important.
Absolutely. But you have to start somewhere when you're changing things. Under that assumption, you would never change anything.
So thoughts on the new definition that Mr. Boson proposed?
And just to reflect, what I proposed was simply describing it as Title II of the Drug Quality and Security Act. And that way you don't have to list everything that thing did.
I think that's fine.
Other perspectives?
So we have a consensus. Sounds like to me. I'd be willing to make a motion.
Well, do we need to look at the stuff below, or do we just add the definition, Cam? I forget.
The stuff below is just referencing the federal code. There's not a lot of substance to it other than citing the federal code. So it's pretty generic.
Any feedback?
I'm fine with it the way it is now.
I'm as well.
We have a consensus. Maybe can we get a approval to move it forward?
I'll make a motion to move this forward to the full board.
Dan, I'm not sure. This is, yeah, I apologize. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Nate, if you've got feedback.
Am I able to comment here? I just want to get ahead of,
Yeah,
I think
please.
is it Drug Quality and Security Act, I believe, rather than the Supply Act? Can someone confirm that?
It is Security Act. My apologies.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, thanks, Cam.
Catch.
And it's a Roman numeral 2 while we're here.
My motion stands.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right.
All right, those were the two robust discussions we had last time, and looks like we had that today as well. I think maybe we move into our other subjects where we have Mr. Palumbo and
guests.
Mr. Hunnell present for.
Okay, perfect. Kim, do you want to start off here? I don't think we have any proposed language. Where would you like to start the discussion?
We don't. I think we just, right now, I think it's important for the task force to understand, and then of course relate to the full board at a future meeting on what practices are happening today in the space of mail order pharmacies in respect to mailing prescriptions to various parts of the country that have weather that's considerably different from one region to the other, and how are they managing that?
So would you like to have each of them kind of give a little bit of perspective from their organizations? And Emily, I know you can't speak on behalf of PillPack, but you have Amazon, but you do definitely have that experience. So might be helpful to understand how they do it as well. Is that where you'd like to maybe start off, as we can kind of talk about what's happening today and then go from there?
Absolutely. That's a great place to start. Thank you.
Sounds great. Does somebody want to volunteer to go first?
Rich or Emily, I can start off if you'd like.
Sure.
Yeah, so Lori and board task force members, I appreciate and I thank you for allowing me to come here before you today and give a take on mail delivery pharmacy. The one thing I'd like to call out from the beginning here is I know today's discussion is really focused around mail delivery pharmacies getting meds to patients. One thing I want to call out is that regardless of the pharmacy where meds are dispensed from, that could be a mail delivery pharmacy like the one that I'm the pharmacist in charge of, a hospital that may be administering it, or even a local pharmacy. All of those medications are going to have some period of time where they're in transit. So starting with manufacturers, being shipped from where they're located, which possibly are in other countries, to wholesalers. Sometimes there's secondary wholesaler arrangements. Sometimes there's repackagers, even central fill models, right? Meds may be, in transit from pharmacy to pharmacy. So I wanted to call that out just because I think today's discussion is focused on, pharmacy to patient, which is, a great topic to discuss. But there's so much more, I think, to when we evaluate how medications are exposed to temperatures. And that really involves all of the other stakeholders in the supply chain. So manufacturers, wholesalers, et cetera, the ones I had mentioned before. And I think that there could be a lot to be learned from those entities with the data that they have, the practices they use. Because a lot of times pharmacies look at what they are doing and the data that they have as well and that they provide to us. And we mimic, or sometimes even do things even better than how they ship drugs to us. But I do want to call that out because I know that when you start introducing all of those other entities into this discussion, it's obviously a lot broader. And then some may argue that maybe this is a conversation that should be at the federal level where the FDA is involved, where they can kind of look at what the manufacturers are doing as they have jurisdiction over them. So that's really the first thing I wanted to call out. We welcome the conversation today, but I do think that this is a much bigger decision for us to collect more data. And then once we have that data to make an informed decision, I think that's where we can go from here. But Emily and Rich, I mean, I just wanted to start off with that. Anything you want to add along those lines?
Mr. Hunnell, before they jump in, I do want to echo what you said there. That is a growing concern for myself as well. And the world of manufacturing is expanded, right? It's just not within the confines of this country. It's international. So you have products coming in from various parts of the world, whether through airline carriers or ships, and they're sitting on cargo bays, or, I mean, think about if it's transported using ships. That could be several weeks or months before it gets into this country.
Sitting in the middle of the ocean.
Middle of the ocean, under what conditions? So I mean, that is a concern that during my time with the FDA, sharing my thoughts regarding some of these things, we've had discussion with them. And these are growing concerns, and I think it has to be addressed higher than the state level because it's out of our jurisdiction in some cases.
And I think that's a very fair point. Like when we think about like the entire, like if there's a concern from a patient safety standpoint, why are we only looking at it from a certain perspective potentially? Like the process should be applied uniformly throughout the entire thing. It shouldn't be applied to just one portion of the delivery process, because ultimately if it's going to impact at one place, it's going to impact at another. So I think it's a very fair point. Thank you, Nathan.
Rich and Emily, did you want to add anything there?
So I think to further expand, what Nate had just talked about, I think it's also important to realize that manufacturers are not exactly supplying some information that might be applicable to shipping things. So in other words, we certainly utilize what we're able to get from the manufacturers, what we've done, with in-house data, looking at different temperature extremes in different areas. I think but I do think it's really important to understand that what the manufacturers provide is not necessarily available to pharmacies. So, when we see some of these potential proposed rules that come forth, they say you must follow the manufacturer's guidelines. And in a lot of cases, they're not providing us the information. We asked for it. And we certainly work with them and with a lot of different things, but I think it's important to realize that some of that information is just not available to pharmacies. It doesn't matter the size of the pharmacy, it's just not available. The other thing is, I think it's important to also look at communications. I think that plays a big role in this whole shipping situation. I think communications, we have some responsibility. We certainly have responsibility on our end to make sure the patients are aware when the product's been shipped, when a product's been delivered, and I think that also goes a long way into ensuring that these packages that are being shipped are being received and taken in within a reasonable amount of time. I mean, not suggesting that there's an issue with the temperature, but I do think that that's a part of what could be incorporated into some kind of proposed discussion or rule, as to ways to take care of some situations that may be out there right now. I'll pass
Richard,
it on to
if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I was going to add to that. We really live in kind of like an e-commerce world today. Outside of pharmacy and healthcare, I know just from the things that I get from ordering stuff on apps or online or whatnot, I am very connected, and so are my family and friends and whatnot on when things are being shipped. I have access to a tracking number as well to track that. then I also get notified when things are delivered, right? So it prompts you and it keeps you connected and informed on, promptly retrieving a package that could come from a pharmacy as well. In our pharmacy, we have invested, in those platforms, mobile apps, website, the different technologies. And we also have, a telephone means as well, where someone could call us and get that information so that they are aware when something's going to be arriving.
It's good to hear the safety-minded efforts that are in place. I think they seem like common sense and technology solutions, and I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, I think I agree with most of what's been stated. I want to make sure that we're really balancing patient safety and patient access, which is in turn a patient safety issue. I agree with the more holistic approach to the entire supply chain. I think that would be really warranted in this case, because just to kind of state it a little bit differently, usually when you're trying to focus on a problem, you're not focused on the last mile. What's done has been done by then. So I would love to learn more about the more upstream effects here. I think also, obviously I can't speak on behalf of an employer. I'm not employed by a pharmacy, but I do have a lot of experience working in a mail order setting and working with packaging experts and accreditors. There's so much information and so many ways to kind of approach this problem. And I think that there's been some really interesting work done by different organizations. When I was working in mail order, it was part of my role was to figure out what the industry standard was and what other companies were doing. And I heard so many interesting things. I heard some mail orders were doing temperature studies that occurred between the originating pharmacy and the patient's address, and doing some sort of algorithmic equation to understand how to pack, right? Versus some pharmacies using certain packaging systems, or using different network pharmacies or different carriers depending on temperature. So I think there's a ton of ways to look at this and ensure temperature control during shipping. And I think that most major pharmacies are now being held to URAC standards, which, going through that in my experience, was extremely rigorous in the temperature part. It was all centered around USP. I learned a ton in that process. And I've heard that within the industry, the new version of URAC is the strictest it's ever been on this portion. So people have reached out to me in the past and been like, how can you figure this out? And I'm like, there's 100 ways to figure this out. It kind of depends on a bunch of different factors. So all that to say, I agree with everything that's been said. And I think a more holistic look would be warranted.
Emily, I'd like to add to your point, you brought up accreditation, so I know we want to talk about the practices that, go on in the pharmacies today. URAC and even, various forms of NABP accreditation, those are things that we pursue and we have. And to your point, it is a very rigorous test of our, of us meeting standards that are set by various organizations that URAC looks at for best practices. We have attained those accreditations in the past, and it requires us to self-test, self-validate, all of, our shipping methods and whatnot. So I do want to pass that along, and also to even during Board of Pharmacy inspections, when inspectors come in here, these conversations take place, these processes are reviewed.
Can any of you talk a little bit about how you manage your shipping process today? And does it differ based on where the product is going and the type of product and that kind of stuff? I mean, there's shipping of all different kinds of drugs, right? So there's going to be ambient drugs, there's going to be refrigerated drugs. I assume that those are not shipped in the same way, at least in my experience in pharmacy, they are not. But I'd love to hear a little bit more from some of you around how do you manage it today? And is it the same across the country? Is if I'm going to get a prescription delivered from PillPack that's in Phoenix to my house, it's an hour, right? Versus if I'm located in the state of New York and it's coming to me, is that process the same? And is it the same throughout the year?
I can start the conversation on that one. So to answer your question, Lori, when drugs are brought into inventory, a review is done to determine, what are the recommended storage conditions, and you're going to start figuring out, the best ways to ship those to ensure the integrity of those drugs. So, there is the use of coolers that go through, extensive testing to ensure, temperature requirements for refrigerated meds. We also look at other meds and we'll look at the physical characteristics of them. And there would be times when we would ship something in a cooler at certain times of the year or to certain places, based on the temperatures that they'd be exposed to. So it's really an individual review of the meds, manufacturer guidance and whatnot. And then all of the testing that I kind of mentioned before on how each of those shipping methodologies could apply to those meds and ensure patient safety.
Rich, anything to add?
I'm trying to unmute. Yeah, I think it's also important. Like Lori, you had said there's different types of medications are being shipped. So cold chain is done in an entirely different way. It's done based on definitely temperature in particular regions. Because remember that if you're shipping something that has to be cold shipped, if you're shipping it to say Minnesota, or in the middle of the winter, it can't be done in the same way that it's done in the summertime. So, I think that there is certainly a lot of data that's been put together with respect to cold chain shipping as well as ambient drug shipping. And I do think that consideration is taken into the region, the time of year, and where it's being shipped to. And then I also think it's important to understand, as the process goes through, you monitor, if along the way, if there's an issue like with the shipping and how long it takes to get there, then it may require some recall of the product or something. So, I mean, I recall when there was a time when FedEx was shut down in Memphis because of an ice storm, and it was like 3 days. And so that product was not going out. So the whole entire shipment, based on our tracking things, had to be redone and sent to the patient. So, all of that plays an important role in this whole distribution of the meds when being shipped to patients.
I assume that you guys have logistics experts that look at this and kind of track for those types of situations. Like if you have a massive shutdown of something like FedEx or whatever, and that's your primary distributor, I would assume that that's something you guys are monitoring for those activities and things like that, so that you can make sure that there's not gaps for patients. Is that an accurate assumption on my part?
Yes, that's been my experience. Obviously, I can't speak on behalf of past employer, but that's been my experience.
I agree.
It's being monitored proactively.
Ms. Walmsley, if I may ask a question?
Yes, please.
So when there's the failure, let's say, I mean, this is a lot of people touching this medication being transported from point A to point B, and there's something that went wrong in the process, and a patient reaches out to the company that shipped it. How does the company address that? How do they make it right to that patient?
I could probably speak on this first. I used to work as a counseling and kind of like customer service pharmacist for a mail order pharmacy. And we got those calls semi-often. So it was either calls in which there was some sort of disturbance, right? Like, hey, there's a hurricane coming. I don't know if my shipment's going to make it here. And then there were occasional, like, I did this for a few years, occasional questions about temperature, like could probably count on two hands. And we would probably approach those situations in general about the same. It's like, okay, what is the patient's concern? And how can I like make this right for them? Or like, how can I get them what they need as soon as I can? For the like kind of supply chain disturbance type situation, what we would generally do is try and see if there was some way to kind of circumvent the issue, right? So for instance, if like Rich said, if FedEx was shut down in Memphis, like could we somehow send this via UPS next day air or something and get this to the patient ASAP so they don't have a drug omission? versus if someone had a concern about temperature. And I think like sometimes these things do happen. I recall it actually happening with a cold chain shipment. So it was like a fully insulated type situation, right? Cooler, ice packs inside, but the patient had forgotten about it and it had stayed on their porch for a few days. And they called and they're like, hey, listen, my insulin's in here. My ice packs aren't cold anymore. What do I do? And what we did was like address their concern. We had to like look up sort of the temperature in the area. We had to look up the manufacturer's packaging and what they suggested and try and figure out if the medication was still safe for the patient to use. And if it wasn't, we would then go ahead and make an attempt to replace the shipment. The one thing that I don't entirely recall and probably like depends on plan and some other issues is like if the pharmacy would take a loss on reshipping that medication, if they would then have to just out of pocket send that medication for free, which I think I have done in the past to take care of the patient, but I also don't really think that's sustainable for a lot of business models, especially smaller businesses. I don't know if anybody has anything to add there.
Well, I mean, if a package looks to be compromised and the patient calls, it will be replaced. And that also includes, so let's say it's a controlled substance, you know, obviously you can't just go ahead and refill something. Or you either take, if there's refills remaining, then you can use that process, use the refill, and then, you know, somehow notify the physician or the prescriber and say, your patient has not abused this medication. That was compromised. We sent another one, but, you know, the next time they need a refill, you know, their refills are exhausted because we had to take one off. And the same thing holds true with non-controls. I mean, we work, you know, whatever we can out with the patient to ensure that ultimately they get the medications they need, and look at it, how to expedite getting that to the patient if for whatever reason the package or, you know, may be compromised.
And to add to it, you know, Rich was mentioning that, you know, those packages are replaced, you know, to many times, you know, it is at a cost to the business, but that's, you know, you take care of the patient first, then you worry about the cost later.
Yeah, agreed. That's how I've always approached it.
I mean,
You know, I think Nathan, you said this, what stood out to me that I personally, as a patient, would like is the notification, because if I know it's coming, I'm going to make sure that I'm there to receive it. I'm going to be making sure that I take measures on my end to make sure that I'm there to take in my medications as soon as possible. So to me, that's a huge part.
I'd like to jump in on something here too as well.
Yeah, please, Frank.
When you have you get something and you have a number that you call, you can call those people, and it's not always getting somebody that really knows what's going on. An example, Cologuard. I knew it was coming. I got a notice that it was going to be delivered that day. However, it never said it was going to be delivered or what time it was there, so I could make sure I picked it up. When I did see that it was there, it was hot. The ice pack was completely melted. So I called them, is this test still valid? Does it still work? Oh, it's perfect. You don't need to worry about it. I asked, why did you have cooling in there if you didn't need to be cooled? Oh, don't worry about it. It's okay. So the point being is, unless people know and are informed when you call, they can't take care of the patient, the recipient very well. And that's got to be part of the whole process as well, making sure that those call centers are trained and know what's going on.
Other task force members, do you have questions for our experts or comments?
I can add a comment. And again, it's kind of not a solution, but something that we deal with in the, the hospital systems. So it really depends on the medication, the individual medication, because, based on the manufacturers, there's different excursions that are allowable. So maybe, you know, health systems or pharmacies should look at their formulary to determine which ones have that narrow therapeutic excursion range. And I know we deal with a lot of research drugs, and that's highly, just like the URAC and, you know, accreditations, that's highly regulated with the temperatures. And a lot of them come with like temp monitoring devices. And I'm not suggesting that, but, you know, with certain medications, maybe that is something that could be used. Because that's when, you know, when you receive it, you kind of see, was it out of range or not? So just a few things to kind of comment on and point out. That would be helpful, as you know.
Thank you, Bina.
Mm-hmm.
I have a quick question, and for all of them, but I assume that your basic guidelines, you're deferring to USP, which then defers to the manufacturer's instructions. Is that correct?
That's correct, Roger.
Yes. And in fact, part of the URAC accreditation, and I don't think we're all trying to like we're emphasizing that URAC is a very important accreditation, but obviously there's other mail order, you know, folks at pharmacies that are mailing things that, you know, aren't in URAC accreditation. But part of the URAC accreditation looks at if you're following the USP guidelines and what is your process and what are your policy and procedures, and, you know, also like what kind of data have you developed based on what's been shipped, and, you know, and you know, back and forth. So yeah, I mean, it definitely USP is taking, you know, highly, you know, in regards to how these things are being shipped.
Well, I look at that kind of even similar to like a temperature excursion that happens in a pharmacy. I mean, air conditioners go out in Arizona all the time in the summertime. So pharmacies have to make decisions on, well, the air conditioning was out for 12 hours. What do we do with the medications, right? And maybe the refrigerator didn't go out because the pharmacy had power, but there was a temperature excursion in the pharmacy. So pharmacies, and like, this is a normal process, in my opinion, that pharmacies have to make those decisions, right? Based on the circumstances of that, based on the manufacturer's guidelines. And sometimes the answer is yes, you have to get rid of all of the inventory, just like you have to if the product gets stuck in Memphis sometimes. So I think that the USP standards is very much, to me, a standard of care that refers back to the manufacturers based on their temperature studies.
The other comment I wanted to make is, I am sure there are perhaps one or two mail orders that only mail within a single state, but all of you folks mail across the country. And if every state were to have their own set of rules, I assume that would be a nightmare on this.
I think that would be challenging. Just because how do you match state A to state B, right?
Well, and I think that was brought up earlier in the discussion, that this is a beast of a discussion that should be held by the FDA. I mean, the FDA defines excursion, sort of, right? And it's very, very vague. They throw out the word excursion, but it's not purely defined as to how many times can a drug go through excursion, or at what points does that drug become not usable to be distributed in the healthcare space. Those are frustrating points that I've already addressed with the FDA, but you know, just moving the FDA in any one direction is very, very challenging to do.
Well, and I think about like all the different processes, and I think it was Nathan, you that brought it up, right? So there's like from the very start of the distribution process, from the manufacturer to the wholesaler to the pharmacy to the patient. But then there's also lots of different kinds of pharmacies, right? And there's lots of different types of registrants, licensees that are involved in this process, and lots of other different things like central fill maybe that happens in between. But like, we're talking about small businesses, we're talking about big businesses, we're talking about hospitals. Like, this would really impact everybody. And like, I'm familiar with the URAC standards and I think that they're great, but I don't know that I think that that's a reasonable expectation. Even if that was, and we haven't even started talking about policy yet, but I don't know that I think that would be reasonable for an independent pharmacy that maybe ships a couple of compounds across the state of Arizona. Like, there's an extreme cost to business to do that, and that might force an independent that ships prescriptions out of business. And that certainly isn't good from a patient access standpoint, back to your point, Emily. So I think this is certainly a complicated topic. I think it's one that's definitely worth discussion. But I think it's much bigger than just even, to your point, Cam, I think it's much bigger than just even our board. I think this is a much bigger piece.
Can I make a comment just kind of based on business principles?
Yeah, Michelle.
I am not a pharmacist, but we deal with issues like this throughout the retail supply chain, outside of the pharmacy world. And it is always a complicated issue, and it is always an impact to business. And particularly when we're looking at pharmacies where you're impacting patient health and patient safety. I agree with everything that's been said on how complicated it is and how a federal solution is really the only way. And that's what we found in other supply chain issues that we have to deal with that are environmental or, just regular merchandise supply chain. We live in, as Cam said, an international arena, particularly in this product line. And so I agree completely that this will require a discussion at a much higher level.
Kim, what already exists in terms of requirements? I definitely think that we need, first and foremost, I want to make sure that we protect patients, right? It sounds like there's a lot of things that are happening. We have a lot of the really large mail order pharmacies represented here on the call, but I want to make sure that we have certain safeguards. And I think we can obviously request perhaps that NABP work with the FDA and others. And I don't want to jump too far ahead in the discussion, but what already exists in rule today, I guess, just to kind of start to think about where we might want to go with this. And I don't know that we're going to finish this discussion today. We may need some time to kind of think and marinate on it, but I guess, can you pull that up from a starting point standpoint maybe for us?
From a specific temperature, obviously we have to follow state and federal law. And federal law does require medications to be kept according to what's in the package insert and on the box itself. So pharmacies have to be compliant in that respect until it gets to the end user per se. Now, of course, there's that asterisk about the temperature with the excursion clause. And that's where the biggest question comes up with our discussions with the FDA is what can you granulate the definition of excursion down a little more than what it is today? Because that's where I think the problem lies. I can certainly entertain NABP to open up that discussion. I think because it impacts the entire country, it just doesn't impact Arizona. And yeah, I can definitely do that. That's not a problem.
Does anyone have suggestions of what they've seen in other states?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Seeing that we live in Arizona with extreme temperatures, and these, even just the 3 businesses that are mentioned and represented here, do we have that many complaints compared to the thousands and thousands of prescriptions that go out in and out of our state? I don't know that proportionately. I don't know that this is actually risen to the level that we have to take an action necessarily. Just curious if we're creating a solution for something that may not be a real issue.
So my understanding of it is in comparison to the number of prescriptions distributed out of just the 2 facilities and former Emily's organization, we're talking millions and millions of prescriptions. We have not gotten a lot of temperature issue complaints. We've gotten some, but we haven't gotten significant. We would say it's not significant.
Cam, based on that comment, were those, and this may be putting you on the spot, you may have to dig around a bit, but were those complaints satisfactorily addressed? I mean, were they big issues? Can you give us any kind of indication on the types of resolution to those complaints?
I think it goes back to what Rich and Nathan said earlier. The question asked, what do you do when there's a failure in the process? And as long as a patient then is taken care of at the end of the day, I believe, and don't hold me to it. I probably have to research it and pull those complaints up, and that would take a lot of time. But I think the matters were rectified behind the scenes, and patient was at the end of the day taken care of.
Thank you.
In my time as a board member, that's how I recall it too. Kevin, I don't know if you've got any thoughts.
No, I haven't. I don't have any thought about
I
this.
agree. We don't have a ton that we see, and most of them have had very good resolutions. I think we may have an upcoming conference on something, but I'm not positive about that. But most of them have had very specific, detailed plans of how they handled it, from past like cases and things like that I recall seeing. They've had very specific responses that they've taken, how they've taken care of the patient. If there was a gap, how they've corrected the gap, those types of things. Kristen, any other thoughts as a board member? And Frank, I don't think we maybe have had one or two since you've been on the board.
I can only agree with what you said.
Hey, Lori, two quick comments. Kim, you mentioned that excursions aren't defined particularly well. I mean, they are defined. They talk about a period of time for where it goes in and a temperature sensitivity. I understand you're asking about some nuances about multiple excursions and some additional detail, but there is a specific definition of excursions under USP for the different temperature ones. But I agree, it could be more clear. It could be more clear. The other one someone asked is, what does Arizona law have in terms of enforcement? Arizona has that you're not allowed to sell or distribute an adulterated drug. An adulterated drug is a drug that is or may have been stored at inappropriate temperatures. So we have a specific law as well as a federal adulteration law that exists.
Thank you for adding that, Roger.
Excellent point, Roger.
Just to add to that as well, I recall, like, for instance, like the mail order permit type has like a really long list of all the policies and procedures.
Yeah, I was
that
just
are
looking at that.
and it's there. It's in R20 exactly. And like I remember on all my inspections, what would happen is we would have to go ahead and like display all of these policies and procedures. And one of them is about like basically drug storage and like delivery and transport and such. And we would have to kind of talk to the inspector, and what would happen is they would basically like have the policy in front of them, and then they would say, okay, what do you do? And they would make sure that what I was saying actually matched what our policies and procedures said. And sometimes they would also ask for us to show them.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. I thought there was something there. So it's R423 673 limited service mail order pharmacies. Number 12, G12, delivery requirements for transportation, security, temperature, and other environmental controls and emergency provisions.
I would think part of the issue would be delivery to residents. For instance, somebody says, I did not get the drug. It's been sitting out there all day. And the party delivering it, oh, we delivered it and notified them at such and such time. It seems like they're to protect both sides. There needs to be a better notice of when you receive this. Here's a photo of it like Amazon does with products. Here's the time when it was delivered so that the recipient knows that it was there clearly. It's now their responsibility to get that, and it protects the other party. So it's not he says, she says kind of a situation, which is, I think, in part what we have now with regard to home delivery.
That wouldn't be the pharmacy likely. That would be the third party logistic provider that would need to provide that, correct?
Well, I would think it would be, it varies. For instance, if you have Amazon delivering it from theirs, that's one way. If you have a local pharmacy delivering it, it's certainly something else, or some other national delivery organization. Is it being delivered by truck from a local grocery store, or is it being shipped by UPS or whatever?
Should we think about looking at maybe the, maybe one of the experts can answer this. And again, this doesn't take into account the long shipping times from, for example, an overseas manufacturer, which kind of goes back to the same thing. But is there any more concern if it takes a week versus 2 days to get to a patient? Is the propensity for temperature excursions greater, I would think, as the delivery time increases? Should we look at it a little bit based on how long it takes to get to the patient? So if it's like a 2-day delivery versus like general mail.
I can speak to this just from some of my experience. I don't have experience using USPS directly, and I would think that they probably have some of the longer lead times. So can't really speak to that. But in general, in my experience, a lot of the kind of national companies have multiple outlets across the US. And like, depending on the location of the patient and maybe some other factors too, like the drug, that would influence how to get the patient the drug the fastest. And it's also generally like the least expensive too. For instance, like shipping a product from Arizona to New Mexico is going to be way faster and more advantageous to the business and to the patient than shipping that same patient the drug from the Florida location. So that's been my experience, is trying to optimize based on the location and the shipping speed to get it to them as fast as possible. And that like expectation is kind of set up front with the shipping speed during the order process.
Lori, I think your question really kind of leads into some USP guidance around mean kinetic temperature. You're going to look at a period of time and the temperatures that medication was exposed to, and you factor in and you get a single temperature that is indicative of what, the mean of what it was exposed to in transit. And again, that really needs to go all the way back to when the time it's been manufactured. But those are things that are addressed in USP that the accreditors look at, and they will ask, for you to test for MKTs, mean kinetic temperature. So I think it's something out there already that someone could follow and even test for.
Thanks for that, Nathan.
I also just want to clarify something that I said earlier, and Lori had brought up a concern. I do not think that these incredibly expensive and detailed accreditations are realistic for every type of business, and I would not be in favor of requiring that for everybody. I think that would be a really big blocker for small businesses or businesses that are doing like a very unique or niche type of business that is like supporting a patient population.
It's just such a big topic to consider. I don't know. I'm just trying to wrap my head around where to even start to go with it.
Agreed. There's so many facets. As you pull on one string, it just keeps coming. So I don't know.
One of the ways to narrow those kinds of things down are using a tree this happens, then this happens, and which way you go. If you can see something in my mind that's simple graphically, you can define it more accurately. It's very tough to define something accurately or to deal with it when there's so many different aspects to it without being able to see those kinds of things right up front and outline it.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to be able to ultimately at some point be able to give a recommendation to the full board on how we want to address this issue. And I don't know what that is. The answer to Ms. Snare's point that we don't need to do anything because it hasn't been proven to be a big issue is the answer that we want to refer it to some other agency to work on, is the answer that we want to take some sort of intermediate step. I don't know what that answer is. And I don't know that I don't know if, are we prepared to make that decision today? Do people want to think about it? I don't want to cut off conversation, but do we need presentations from others? Do we want to see if we can get the FDA in? I don't know where to take this, and I don't feel right now that we have consensus on anything. Any other committee members have thoughts?
Well, I'll add to what you just said. Also, we don't need to reinvent the wheel if USP already covers the things that we're concerned about. So I don't know if we need to sit here and break down all these aspects that are already addressed in the standards that are being followed.
But we have had a concern brought forward by the public. So, I mean, I want to make sure that we are doing
No, I
ultimately
definitely
what's
want to
best.
ignore that.
Yeah.
But it sounds to me like I'm hearing good mitigation put in place and follow up for the patient safety. I think that what we're hearing is that people are taking safety measures into account and doing their best to mitigate them.
Personally, I would like to see more information, more input, both at the distributor level and at the technology level. Is there something inexpensive, cheap that can be done to put with something that is temperature sensitive, so you know that? I mean, obviously you cannot use something that's expensive. You'd put anybody out of business if you try to do that. I would like to see it explored more. I don't think we have enough good information to make decisions one way or the other. Yes, there's from the people that have come before us with complaints, there's issues, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. Is it delivered? Who said? Did she say it? Did the other person say something else when it was delivered? If there's a better standard for, I use Amazon again because they photograph, and I don't know if others do that, but you can get a text message. Here's when it was delivered. Here's where it is. Go get it. That type of thing would certainly guarantee that more credibility for all parties and more safety for the public. But again, I think we need more information to be able to make good decisions on this. Just because there's existing standards doesn't mean there's loopholes, or there aren't loopholes in that need to be filled or suggested to the feds if it is a federal standard.
And again, like as we think about that from the whole shipping process, I also don't want to put a burden on one facet of the supply chain when there is lots of places where deviations can occur too. I don't think that that's a fair standard to ask one area of the supply chain to be responsible for perhaps even what happened upstream.
Absolutely, and it's got to be universal.
We are at the midpoint of the meeting. I don't know about anybody else, but I need a bio break. I don't know how anybody else feels. If we want to take, what do you want to do? 5 or 10 minutes?
Madam Chair,
10 minutes?
before we take a break, do we still need to continue this discussion, or are we going to table it? And I mean, I think some folks said it well. We do need to look at it from a manufacturer, wholesaler perspective as well. And we permit those guys, so maybe I can reach out to some of those guys to have bring them in for a future discussion, but I don't want to keep Rich and Nathan on the hook here if we're kind of done discussing this. Are we still?
What does everybody else think? I think that would be interesting, Cam. I think I would like to maybe hear from a manufacturer or two, maybe a wholesaler or two, and maybe we spread them into two separate meetings. Spread them into two separate future meetings. The other thing I think I would be interested to see is, and I have not done this homework, I apologize. Is there anything in the NABP Model Act about this? And then maybe what's happening across the other 50 states, because this can't be an issue that's unique to just Arizona. Yes, I know it's hot, but yes, it's very cold in Alaska too. It was very cold in Nebraska when I was there earlier this week. It's cold in Arizona today, actually. I think I would kind of like to see that too. Is there anything else maybe we could task Dr. Gandhi with to bring back to this group? Is there anything else anybody sees that might be beneficial to this conversation as we move forward?
Madam Chair, I would certainly like to see something with regard to technology, inexpensive technologies that may help or may not be able to help. But I'd like to know what's out there.
Anything else, committee members?
I think kind of going back to what we said before, not necessarily for this committee, but for the board in general, I really do appreciate the approach of like, if there is any type of concern, temperature, time in transit, drug emissions, drug errors, whatever it is, that like the board is has been and continues to approach those from like, okay, like how is the pharmacist taking care of the patient and making sure that they get what they need? I think that is like the most important interim step till we have more information, in my opinion.
And I think we do deal with those on a case-by-case situation. Yeah. I recall seeing a case without getting into details of who or what, but there was a temperature deviation, and the organization provided the manufacturer study that says this was the time in transit, this was the temperature there, this was the temperature here, and this is how much the product could deviate. So they showed to us that, you know, that there was due diligence that was considered before they replaced the drug or didn't replace the drug, and kind of the rationale behind it. That sticks out in my mind as one of the cases that we reviewed.
Yep.
Hey, Lori, this is Matt. Good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
One of the questions I had is just really great comments and great discussion on this. My question is, you know, as we move forward with some of these topics, and this is a great example, the setting here feels like a decision-making group, executive decision-making group, and it seems like there's a lot of discussion still on what we just talked about. Is this an opportunity for us to either have a subcommittee or an offline working group to kind of look through some of the details of what we've been discussing today to bring back to this group?
So almost create a sub task force, like we've had a compounding task force in the past.
Yeah, I don't even know if it needs a full task force housing, but just some of the details that we're kind of sifting through here. Maybe a different alignment is an option. Just before our bio break, I don't want to delay your bio break. Just a thought. Thank you.
I know, Madam Chair, we've given out homework before, but I don't know. I'd have to research this, whether we can do a subcommittee offline.
Yeah, so let's you and I can connect offline. I think we have some good next steps, and I think this is going to require additional discussion. Nathan, Rich, thank you for participating. Would you guys be open to continuing to participate if we need you to come back for further discussions? Because I think we probably need to hear from some of these other groups, and then we can start to tackle what are potential solutions, if any, as we move forward.
Well, I'd like to thank Pam and yourself, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to address the group, and I would certainly be open to further discussions, because I think as you develop more questions, it might even be easier for some of us that work in it to develop the answers for you. And if we don't know the answers, you know, per se, that we can get them for you, moving forward. So.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it. I think there's a lot of value in having subject matter experts on this task force, because ultimately we want to make sure that we make good rules and that we don't create unintended consequences for patient access and those kinds of things. And none of us can be experts in every single topic. So I think it's super important that we bring people in that have the expertise to really kind of speak and weigh in on the process, because I know I've personally learned a lot today. So I appreciate all the feedback that you guys have brought into us.
And I echo Rich's statements. I welcome an invitation to continue the conversation with you all. And to your point there, I do want to reiterate, we have a lot of patients in Arizona and elsewhere that rely on us to be able to get them their medications that they need. Disabilities, we just went through a pandemic recently with a lot of restrictions, and there's people with transportation limitations as well. I think those are things that I think we need to keep in mind, because as we talk through this, we definitely don't want to create barriers for those patients. But yeah, thank you again for having me on today, and happy to continue the conversation with you in the future.
Great. Thanks, everybody. With that, let's take a, what do you want to do? 5-minute break, Cam? 10-minute break?
10 would be good.
Okay, 10-minute break.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Welcome back from break, everybody. Dr. Gandhi, do we have everybody, or you want to do a quick roll call?
Just glancing at the participant, looks like we have everybody still, Madam Chair.
All right. Where would you like to go with the agenda next?
I think we got 3 hot topics out of the way. Maybe Article 11, 4A.
So this is on here because it's up for sunset review, correct?
Correct. The board is tasked to do a 5-year review. Article 11 just came up as a 5-year review, so it was determined that, hey, since we're up for a 5-year review, why not just look at that article and revise it to what our goal is, and then discuss it. So it was chopped up and modified for your review. I can share it on the screen with you guys so that we can
Please
go through it really quickly.
Can I make a comment up front? When I was looking at this, it would refer me to the board website. And the board website updated date said March 31st, 2020. And the reference on the .gov site had September 30th, 2023. So I don't know if there was an update, or what that indicated, but I just don't know if we have the most current on our board website.
Yeah, I know, Ms. Nair, you and I did discuss that a week ago. I hadn't had an opportunity to cross-reference. I think majority of it would be similar. This was pulled by my rule writer. So most of it will be relevant. There might be some tweaks here and there that we can certainly clean up after our kind of discussion right now. With that, Madam Chair, do you want me to just go line by line or section by section?
Sorry, unmute. Yeah, let's go section by section.
Okay, so starting with 1101, licensure eligibility. We have 1101, which talks about technicians and technician trainees. And we felt that maybe it's best that we repeal this section and just put it in and transfer whatever's applicable into like 1102 and the respectful sections that address and 1103 here, technician trainees and technicians, rather than having it on its own, creating an entire page of language that may not be necessary.
I agree.
Question for that on technicians. Between different boards and commissions, technicians, there's not a clear definition of what a technician is from one industry to another. If I don't know, I haven't fully read this, so I apologize. But it's for GERC's purposes, it's important to know that within this industry, this is what a technician means. And
defined in statute, isn't it, Kim?
That's what I'm looking up right now, Madam Chair.
It's defined that you have to have a license and what the licensure requirements are and what tasks they can do. So I think it's broken down pretty specifically.
Yeah, pharmacy technician is defined in statute. Pharmacy technician trainee is also defined in statute. And it's pretty generic definitions, but it's still under the definition section.
Is there a reference to that in the document? To that statute?
Let me just share that statute with you. real quick here.
I wasn't so much worried about that. I just wanted to make sure that it was defined and that there was a reference to it.
Gotcha. We can certainly look at that in the rules package and see if pursuant to statute, certainly we can add that to it.
And I brought that up only because this is a big thing with GERC right now, and part of the reason it's a big thing is it's been a point that I've been pushing on GERC for a long time. So GERC has been trying to make sure that these are defined clearly between the different organizations instead of just seamlessly being used.
Okay. So I made note, Mr. Thorwald, on that one. So we will
Yeah,
definitely.
and it's in statutes. That's in the definitions and statutes. It's in 32-1901.
Yep.
Definition number 36 is pharmacy technician. Pharmacy technician trainee is actually technically wrong. The definition in the statute, because it says pharmacy technician trainee means a person who's licensed pursuant to this chapter. It should be registered.
You know, we're in a legislative process, so we can certainly fix that part.
But I think we're good there, don't you, Frank? If that's defined in statute.
It's as long as it's defined in statute, that's good, and the statute, the rules reference that statute.
We'll try to figure out how to reference that back to statute, Madam Chair.
Yeah, like maybe in A, like pharmacy technician licensure as required, 32-1901. I don't know.
Yeah.
We can figure it out, but yeah, it is defined in statute. So.
Yep.
I have a question about B2.
Yep.
I think that reference is incorrect where it says D5. I think it should be C5. D5 is, I think, regarding a pharmacist. No, let me see. See.
They're relettered here, Kristen. I think
Okay.
you're looking at the old one.
It could
So C becomes D here. Go back up, Cam. Please. But do that down now.
All right.
Keep going.
Down.
Yeah.
be.
See there, Kristen? See where C becomes D?
Yeah, let me just look at it again. It was under 1101 though. I think we're under. Oh, you're showing me the reference. Okay. Let's see. C.
With the changes here, it's relettered. So Cam is using the new letter.
Okay.
Madam Chair, the only thing I added here to 1102 is right now, based on our statutes and rules, a graduate from a board-approved pharmacy school, so technically a pharmacist, but not registered pharmacist yet, is not eligible for a pharmacy technician license. So that's why I added this. So if they graduated from a pharmacy school, I would think that they should be eligible for a pharmacy tech license, but
I agree. Or maybe somebody that hits after the five attempts that they could at least work as a technician.
something like that, or
Yes.
yeah. So and I also added this foreign pharmacist equivalence exam, which determines that the education they received is equivalent to what they would have gotten here.
Yeah.
If that's the case, then they should also be eligible for a technician license.
I like
So
that.
Cam, this is Kevin.
Yep.
Under that number 2, the message or the verbiage can be misconstrued as if you graduated from a board approved pharmacy school, you would not have to take the board approved pharmacy technician exam.
Correct. I think if you
Okay.
graduate from pharmacy school, you kind of have the knowledge that you don't not necessarily have to be nationally certified.
Okay.
So
Like if you go to Midwestern, you pass pharmacy school, but you can't pass the exam, or you failed for the 5th time.
Okay.
Other states have this too. I'm pretty sure like it's pretty explicit in California and stuff. Like if you graduate pharmacy school, you get kind of fast tracked to being a tech. The board approved pharmacy school, is that just defined as anything accredited by ACPE?
correct.
Yes,
Okay.
that we approve every year.
Okay.
Do you have any side documents here that show what the other states are doing with respect to this?
That I do not have, no.
You will need it for GERC. They'll want to know clearly that this is not that this is a reasonable thing to do, and that the other states are leaning this way. If there's only one other state doing it, you'll have to have a reason why, and I think it's clear that why, but you'll still need that documentation.
Okay, we'll work on that, Mr. Thorwald.
That may be in the survey of pharmacy law,
Yeah,
for a quick reference.
yep, I'll take a look at that. Okay, any other questions on 1102? I think the only other thing I added was the word active or active, because our system right now uses open, but we're in discussions with another system and I don't know what they're going to have, whether it's open or active. So if it's trying to figure out how to not have a specific designation. And if I come up with one, I'll probably change it to something generic, but for now, we'll just leave it at that.
Some of my states say clear too, so I think there's probably a bunch of different terminology that they use.
Open is what matches our licensing database, right, Cam?
Today, yes. It's open, in progress, or pending. Those are the 3 statuses that we typically use.
I think it's important that we use the language that's on the database so that way we're super clear.
Yeah, I know. We've been in talks with this new database company, and we've asked them, can we have the designation of open? And it was kind of like pulling teeth. And at the end of the day, we're like, hey, this is what it says in the rules, right? So you got to make it work. And they're like, I think they said they used the word active. So I want to be a little more flexible. Obviously, we prefer to be open and be consistent with what we've been doing. But if the system is not allowable.
Yeah. If you think that's what it might go to, that makes sense to have both words there. I just want to make sure that it's clear to the licensed public that they're like an in-progress license is not the same thing. Like that does not mean the same thing as open, for example.
Correct.
Like it's
Correct.
you're not permitted to work on an in-progress license.
Correct.
Those things definitely need to be clearly stated so that the person reading it can clearly understand what's required.
Yeah.
This is like, I have a more kind of overarching question. I think this is my last question on this section, or like on this rule, is like, I really like how it says like to reference the site, because that's the most up-to-date version of like who's licensed, who can practice, what their status is. And I think understanding that everybody can print their license or registration now, would something like this also be relevant for the other license types? So for instance, like if a pharmacist passes their test and they're open on the site, like, are they good to practice, or are they still waiting for something to come in the mail or something like that?
So they can go to their profile, Emily, and print out a license themselves.
Okay.
Yes, at that time, and
Okay.
it should show that they're allowed to work.
Okay.
The only thing that is in the mail is a license, but also a wall certificate, right? So kind of like
Okay.
a one thing.
So they can work, any license type can work if they say open or active on the site, and they can print out their own thing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Quick question with regard to the printing of that. Is it possible, what safeguards are in place to prevent somebody from fraudulently going in and getting a license and putting a name of somebody that is not certified on there?
So the license can only be printed through your profile. So you have a user ID and password, and once you put that in there, that allows you to print your license.
Okay.
Any random person cannot just print a license without being in your profile.
Okay.
But the general public can look up a license status. So like,
Yeah.
for example, say a pharmacist was working with a technician that they don't normally work with, they could go to the board's website and validate that that person had an active or open license, to make sure that that document that they brought was indeed a true document. That's open to the public to check.
That's correct. We have a real-time verification page, which not only used by the public, but other licensing boards in an event. Some folks want to reciprocate or get a verification of their license to issues to somebody.
Keyword searches are capable.
Yeah, you can just know their name and like their technician or something, it'll come up.
Is one other quick question, and I apologize for my being long-winded here. Is there any other board, commission, agency that any of this is potentially in conflict with federal law? Is there anything in there that is not clear?
So what we're talking about, Frank, is more specific to the board's authority, and so it wouldn't conflict with federal law right now. No.
Well, I didn't think that would be the case, but I just threw it in there. But I'm thinking of other boards and commissions, nursing.
No, I don't. This would only apply to
anyway.
us. This would only apply to us, Frank,
That's
and our
correct.
licensees.
Okay, good. That's just all I wanted to be sure. I thought that would be the case, but I'm not going to make an assumption.
Any other thoughts on this, guys? Again, you'll see a lot of this section here that came out from what we repealed because it was more applicable to like a technician, or it didn't seem like it didn't seem kind of weird having its own section at the top, the 1101 section.
Did we take out the pharmacy law in 2B since we got rid of pharmacy law?
Certainly.
I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing if they haven't practiced in that long that they have to do law.
Yeah, I wondered about that too. I wondered if it
I
was
didn't
intentional.
know if that was intentional or if that was just
Right.
left over from before.
It's a good point.
I don't know that I'm opposed to them having to do law in this particular case. Because a lot changes in 5 years, right? Or say 10. I mean, it's anything more than 5. Like,
Yeah, I agree with that in general. I do think it could be a little bit confusing though. If they were like, oh, okay, here's the CE section about the CEs that a technician has to do versus like the delinquent section. I could see it both sides.
Hmm.
You want to make it as clear as possible and as least confusing as possible and moving forward with that.
So do we want them to do Law CE if they've been not practicing for more than 5 years, or do we care?
I don't know.
I think extra education is always beneficial to the licensee, Lori. It wouldn't hurt.
They have 20 hours of continuing education and we took out the law. I mean, I guess I could go either way. I don't know if it makes sense. I don't know if it's congruent with what we're doing.
If we want to
It's
really
not.
make it painful, we could just have them attend a board meeting.
They have to appear to get it. Well, do they have to appear to get it anyway?
If they're over 5 years, yeah, I think we generally have them appear, but have to double check.
Yeah, so they would have to attend anyways, really.
Yeah.
Is there any increase? What's the cost to them? Is any changes in cost to being able to do this from the previous rule?
They have to pay back fees, don't they, Cam, or is that just
Yeah,
how
it goes
goes?
back 2 cycles. So we cap the renewal fee or reinstatement fee to 2 versus unlimited. Before, a couple of years back, it was on as far back as your license was gone. If it was gone 10 years, you had to pay like 5 renewal fees, but we did cap it.
So this is actually a benefit to them financially.
Well, financially, CE requirements, CEs are, you can get free CEs, Frank, from any number of sources, so it doesn't really impact them.
Where I was going to ask that would be a question from Girk with regard to what's the financial impact on the party?
I would say 0 impact.
Well, CE that's free is becoming less and less.
Yep.
I only mentioned that is in your presentation, and I'm sure you already know it. Just make sure that that's mentioned to Girk that on that.
Certainly.
But I think when you look at it from a net difference, I don't see that that's any more of a cost than if they would have retained their
No,
license. It still would be
exactly.
less because it would be basically the equivalence of one renewal period versus having to make up. If they had been out of practice and you said you have to complete all of your back CEs, that would be a lot more.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, I think the way to look at it, if we didn't change the language, they'd spend the same amount as if they were spending here. It's the same fee.
Sure.
So net increase as far as expense goes doesn't increase. It stays the same. Any other thoughts? I think my thought is, I think we eliminate this just to avoid confusion about when is law required, when is not required.
I'm good with that. And they're going to have to come see us anyway. So by default, they're going to hear some of the discussions anyway.
Correct. Okay, moving on to 1103. Again, you'll see some language that was transferred over from 1101 so that we can repeal that section.
Kim, I have a question about this section.
Yep.
So for pharmacy technician trainee registration, does that person have to be residing in Arizona, or can that person be residing in some other state outside of Arizona?
There's nothing that restricts them to the state. They can apply if they're in New York for a technician trainee registration.
Okay.
I don't know how they'll use it there, but
because nowadays there's a lot of businesses that are being conducted remotely.
Yep.
So I'm just thinking, let's say someone who's living in New York, working remotely for a company here in Arizona, doing data entry. And that person is not a pharmacy tech yet, but is has wanted to apply for the technician training registration and then become a technician within 36 months.
yeah, one of the concerns we have is, so we allow folks in other states to practice for residents in Arizona using a shared service agreement. which allows that pharmacy in that home state, in their home state, to be permitted, and then they don't have to be. Second caveat is that home state, their home state would have to allow remote working as well and license them. But our position has been that they can't independently work for a company in this state and then work in another state, because we have the authority, and we have, I don't know if we've exercised it, but we have the authority to inspect not only the pharmacy, but anything associated with that pharmacy, which is they could go to their individuals' homes. Now, if that person is living in New York, I don't see us being able to do that regularly, right, on inspection or anything of that nature. So there's limits. Again, through shared services, you can do it.
But they would have to be licensed in their home state, and that would also have to be allowed by their home state, and they would have to be tied to a pharmacy that has a non-resident license with Arizona to do work for Arizona.
Correct.
patients.
Contracted through shared services. Yep.
So there's a lot of other like nuance there, Kevin. We wouldn't necessarily hold jurisdiction over that person, just like we wouldn't necessarily if somebody worked, a technician working in a mail order pharmacy in Florida that shipped a prescription that filled a prescription wrong. Typically that person's not going to be licensed in Arizona, but the facility would be.
Cam, can we back up? I'm sorry. In under 1102, it reads that the D2 reads that the board office shall issue a certificate of licensure and a wall license. Do we automatically issue both? Or
a license and wall certificate for pharmacy technician. Yes, we do give them both.
Oh, okay. I was thinking you had to pay for them separately.
We took that out a while ago.
So you get a certificate of licensure and a wall license.
Correct.
Okay.
It's part of the initial application fee.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Just technical question.
And those are all be able to be just printed out?
Wall certificate, no. A license, yes. So you can go to your profile once the designation is open, and you can print out your license using your profile.
Going back to where we were, I think it needs to be clear that if you are in another state, you can be doing this. Not
shared services already defines that, Frank.
Yeah, and then the non-resident rules address who can work in the facility and what their requirements are.
But in this document, does it refer to that so that it's clear? In other words, if you're reading this, do I have to go read 10 other documents to know that, or can you just refer to make a reference to the other document that states that? If I don't have the expertise or knowledge that you do, or that Cam does, would I know that without having to read voluminous amounts of documents? And that's where I'm coming from.
Would we know that you could repeat that? Would you know what part?
I think Frank is asking that, how does one know that they cannot work in another state strictly without shared services? If you have a license, how do they know they can't work from another state from home?
Because nobody would employ them. I don't think if there was the company would have to set up that arrangement, and they wouldn't employ them if they weren't appropriately licensed. Because they bear that risk.
Where I'm going with any of these things is just simply that it being clear and concise and understandable that this is what I can do and what I cannot do, whether I'm in Arizona or not in Arizona. And if you can't put it, instead of having lots of extra verbiage, at least having a reference to that in another document. That's all I'm saying. Not only in this, but in anything.
Yeah, I can certainly give it some thought and figure something out, Frank. Any other thoughts on 1103, guys?
Hey, Cam,
Yep.
can you go back up to B? This citation, ARS 32-1023B.
Yes.
Is that, I was wondering if that was supposed to be 1923.
Let's look it up.
Also, I'd like to throw out a quick question where you use the references to statutes or to other rules. Do you use hyperlinks in those?
We do not. I think when I mean, I can do hyperlinks, Frank, but when it gets to the Secretary of State, they will probably not have hyperlinks in them.
Right. I was just thinking about, for instance, the board website where you have control over it.
Yeah, so our board website law book, we try to create hyperlinks. I'm not the most tech savvy individual in the world, and so I try to leverage some folks that are. Yeah, I think it should be I'm sorry, Ben, going back to, it is 1923. Good catch.
Thank you. And then the one other part, section D, number 2, the last sentence. I don't know if anyone else read it like that, but I found the wording a little awkward there on that. Under 1103D. Number 2. Any other status other than open or active on the board's verification site, the applicant shall not practice. Wasn't sure how the group felt about kind of keeping it aligned with the last sentence on page 6 under 1102D, the last sentence.
I think that makes sense.
I agree. Substituting registered versus licensed.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense that it says that it's worded the same. Cam, you probably just forgot what you wrote by the time you got there.
I think so. So you're talking about this section here?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Lately, I've been running documents through AI and asking it to tell me if there's any inconsistencies in my documents. And so far, it's been working well at finding them.
Look at you, Mr. Technology. I wouldn't even know where to start with that, Frank. Maybe you can give me a lesson at lunch.
It's actually pretty easy. It's all in the questions you ask. It's just like the old adage, garbage in, garbage out.
Cam, just so I can wrap my brain around that. Can you go back to 11 or go forward? I'm not sure where we're at, but 1103 and see what comes up when under C5.
The old C5?
The old C5. We're just going back to my brain needs to wrap around this because I keep looking it up on my side and it's not coming up right. So that's 1103.
This is C5 right here.
C5. Okay, so in the reference, it has D5 instead of C5. Under 1101 B. B,
This one right here, right?
yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
All right.
Now I'll sleep tonight.
So I had a question about 5 altogether. Is it even needed?
I don't think so.
And it wouldn't be needed because the exam stuff would be covered in the requirements to be a pharmacy technician.
Correct.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Do we need to say, do we need to keep the part in there that it's not renewable? Though, with the 36 months? Or is that somewhere else? That it's good for 36 months and is non-renewable?
I think it's already written in statute. Mark, correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't know for sure certain either, but right.
It's in the beginning of the rule, I think, eligibility applicant for a 36-month non-renewable registration as a pharmacy technician trainee.
Okay, that's good then. I just want to make sure that it's clear that it's non-renewable.
So then we don't need
Why
this
did it-
reference anymore either.
On 1103, I'll give you a minute if you want me to wait.
Yeah, 1103. Go ahead.
Okay, 1103 D is, or yeah, D2. It's just a little clumsy. It says any other status other. How about any status other?
Well, I think Ben brought this up for that is to go
Okay.
back to page 6 and mirror that language. So I will take
Okay.
that back and adjust that so it sounds a little more consistent.
Yeah, just, it was the other back to back in that, any
Yeah.
other.
Hey, Lori, I apologize, but I had this meeting only set till 11:30, and I'm going to have to drop in 5 minutes. I didn't know if you needed to
I
go
do
before.
too. I have a hard stop
Yeah.
at 11:30 as well.
Same
Okay.
here.
I can go all day. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, we won't have a quorum, Miss Nair, so we won't be able to go all day. And
It'll go
actually
way
finish this.
faster. No.
Was there anything in this section that really stood out as a sore thumb?
I think we should go through it, maybe finish it the next time.
Okay.
I don't know that everybody had a chance to really dig in.
I have several other things
All
that I
right.
wanted to bring up.
So we will put a pin in this one for now.
We got a
Alright.
lot accomplished today, though.
Bina, I apologize. We didn't get to your agenda item and, but we'll.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know one of these was specifically Bina's. I'm so sorry, Bina.
Yeah, no worries. I think we can take it up next meeting. That's okay.
I apologize. I would have pulled yours forward too. Just like we did the other. I'm so sorry.
Okay, I think we have 3-4 minutes left. Lori, do we want to continue or do we want to kind of say
I
our
don't-
thanks to everybody for joining?
I don't know that
think
3 minutes is going to help us.
I don't know that another 3 minutes is gonna help either. Cam, where are we at for scheduling for the next meeting?
I think I sent a placeholder out.
Okay,
That's right. So
Oh
That should
yeah,
be
we
on
do
the
already have the
calendars.
next one. So
Yeah.
maybe do you want to do a doodle again for the subsequent one so we can kind of keep them moving on the calendars?
Yep, absolutely.
What time frame do you want me to look at, and I can send you dates?
So next one is scheduled for sometime in February, like the second or third week.
So you want me to send you March?
Yep, yeah, please.
Okay, and then you can back into that with the doodle poll for everybody else.
Yeah, if we can do March, because I think I'm on PTO, March 9th through returning on the 18th, so maybe 18th on would be good.
Okay.
You sent out a placeholder already?
Let me check my calendar real quick. while I-
Yeah, it's the
6th? Oh, no, that's complaint committee. Sorry.
it's the 21st.
Yes.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure we keep moving forward with everything. And even if we, like, I know we ask for a lot of homework for the next one. So even if it takes, like if we don't have the follow-up from the temperature discussion, perhaps we continue on with some of these other discussions, and or bring back compounding and then take up, the temperature discussion again, maybe in March. But I think if we can keep moving, that's good. We've got 2 things to bring forward to the full board so we can keep some stuff moving. So I think we accomplished quite a bit today.
Yep.
Thank you all for your attendance. Appreciate it. And we will talk to you next month.
Thank
Sounds
you.
good. Thank you, guys.
Meeting
Thank you.
adjourned. Thank
Thank
you.
you.